Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite songs, which is Ivy by Frank Ocean. Yeah, let's just get straight into it. So, Ivy is a love song, but for me, it's much more about memory than it is about love. To go into the first line, I thought that I was dreaming when you said you love me. Frank's voice sounds higher and younger, and I know this is lyrical, but I think it'd be remiss not to go into some of the production details. The song is pitched up by a half step, which makes it sound a little higher. And this was a technique that was used a lot in the 60s, such as by the Beatles and Stevie Wonder. And it imbues the song with a nostalgic, dreamlike quality, almost like it exists in some kind of void. This occurs as guitar plays on loop in the background, and we will get back to this later in the episode as well. Frank is thinking about the past. It's about a moment that meant so much to him. And the word dreaming suggests something too good to be true, a feeling of surrealness. And then he sings the start of nothing. And we can assume that this relationship changed the trajectory of his life, but also perhaps became meaningless as it fell apart. And there's this double entendre, one being the start of something innocent and pure, and the second being the start of nothing that evolves into something. And the next line Frank sings, I had no chance to prepare, I couldn't see you coming. This just conveys how unpredictable life can be, how we cannot prepare for the way that people come into our lives. Because can you just imagine if we could see people coming? I think a necessary part of love is that you can't brace yourself for it. The point of it is that it's always uncertain and scary, and takes a certain extent of vulnerability and courage. And then the next lyric, there's a very sudden shift in tone. He sings, I could hate you now. And this is where the song also shifts to present tense. We get the feeling that a big change happened in the relationship, that it ended badly, messily, with leftover resentment and deep cut hurt. But interestingly enough, the way that Frank sings this line is not super angry. It more feels like just matter of fact. And I get a feeling of detachment even when he sings this line. Or maybe it's acceptance, who knows? And then he reverses it in the next line. He says, it's quite alright to hate me now. And he seems to be in acceptance that someone he used to love could hate him now. It also seems like the falling out of this relationship was something that he was partially at fault for. So there's these unresolved tensions brewing. And then Frank sings in the next line, when we both know that deep down, the feeling still deep down is good. And it makes me think, what is this good feeling he's talking about? Is it love or some kind of purity that persists beneath the hate despite whatever's happened? And then the next lines he sings, if I could see through walls, I could see your faking. If you could see my thoughts, you would see our faces. Oh my God, if this isn't good lyrical writing. Anyway, what he means by walls is metaphorical for the mind. And this metaphor actually reminds me a lot of the end of White Ferrari, where he sings, you dream of walls that keep us in prison. It's just a skull. At least that's what they call it. If the skull is more about imprisonment in White Ferrari, then here it's more about facades and fronts. Both of them seem to be putting up some kind of front, maybe out of ego or pride, or just due to how this relationship ended. When he says you would see our faces, he's constantly reminiscing about those times. And there's a repetition of the word if. It's kind of dangerous because the word if opens up just so many possibilities, because the things that you could say, what if this or what if that, it's endless. We can seriously fall into that loop when we keep asking ourselves that question, what would happen if things change slightly? And what the song does is that it dips into a lot of what's not actually real or what's only real in thought. These versions of the past, these versions of this person. You know what? It actually reminds me of that word I read in the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. It's called antimatter, where we have this anti version of things in our lives that aren't actually real, but they're sort of like alternative or adjunct versions of reality. so that they become real because they're in our minds. So yeah, that was a little tangent. Anyway, and then the next line he sings, safe in my rental, like an armored truck back then. We didn't even give a fuck back then. So there's this repetition of back then, and there's a sense that this past felt really protected. There are these enclosed spaces, like the truck, the rental, and it's almost like the past exists in some kind of container, if that makes sense. Untouchable and precious. These enclosed spaces come up a lot in this song as well, which we will touch on later. And yeah, we didn't give a fuck back then. He obviously perceives that time as very carefree and pure. And then Frank sings, I ain't a kid no more. I think that when we think of the past, it makes us realize just how far we are from it. You know, that realization that the past is the past and how far he is from that version of himself. There's this real mourning. The next line only consolidates that when he sings, we'll never be those kids again, you know. The modality of never, like the irreversibility of the past and how we take things for granted when we're younger. You know, we don't realize how much time we have or how good the times are. And then when we reflect on them in hindsight, we realize just how fleeting those moments are, because that's what they are ultimately, moments after moments. And there's this real frustration at time itself. Okay, next line, he sings, we drive to Sid's, had the X6 back then. This is a very specific memory to him. Honestly, it's seemingly trivial, you know, it's just a car drive, but these moments mean so much to him. We've gone back to the past now. The song started off with the past and then went into the present, and now we're in the past again. There's this non-linear storytelling going on, which really mirrors how memory is non-linear. And let me just find the quote I found Frank saying. Right, so Frank said himself, how we experience memory sometimes, it's not linear. We're not telling the stories to ourselves. We know the story. We're just seeing it in flashes overlaid. And that's very much what this song feels like. Flashes of moments in time that meant so much to him, no matter how small or trivial or fleeting they seem. And it's so beautiful, this elevation of the mundane, of the small, of the fleeting. He keeps repeating back then, and this emphasis isolates it, like he realizes that it's truly in the past. In the next lines, he sings, no matter what I did, my waves wouldn't dip back then. And there's this idealization. I think this lyric could mean two things. So one, waves are a hairstyle and you dip your hair to make waves. So that's one interpretation. And it's funny because it's such a trivial thing, but he's mentioning this small frustration that he had with his hair. And I think it's kind of like how in the past we get frustrated and concerned at when we zoom out, like things that don't really matter or aren't as sober as the problems in the adult world. And so maybe it's reminiscing those small frustrations back then, how naive even. But then the other interpretation of waves, it would be, you know, like ocean waves. My waves didn't dip back then, like he never went into a super low time. We're thinking about waves, this cycle of experience and time and feeling. But to say that his waves never dipped is surely some kind of bias, simply because waves are always moving in this cyclical pattern. And then the next lyric, we get another sudden tone shift where he says everything sucked back then. So there's this very stark contrast. He's saying right before his waves would never dip. And now he's saying, well, everything sucked back then. So he's bouncing between these two extremes of it was either all good back then or it was all bad. There's not really a gray area. He lets us see why the past meant so much to him, but he doesn't really show us what about the past sucked. We don't get that information. And so I think if we can think about something differently in the present, right? Like our perception in the present moment of the past, we can sort of change the past because it's all subjective. We live the past and we live reality through our own subjective lens. And so what matters isn't so much the facts, but rather how we perceive what happened. And so if Frank decides, well, you know, my waves never did back then, his past looks all rosy and carefree and wild and amazing. But then when he says everything sucked back then, you put on that lens and you only pick out what sucked. And so that kind of changes everything. That changes the reality of it almost. And there's a really good quote by Ocean Vuong, which, let me find it. So Ocean Vuong says that every time we remember, we create new neurons, which is why memory is so unreliable. And I think Frank is getting at the same idea that memory is not really reliable. We can't ever really be reliable narrators or rememberers, if that's a word. And so every time he's interpreting his past, he's kind of creating a new memory out of it. And so going into these next few lines, Frank sings louder than he has been for this entire song. In the halls of your hotel, arm around my shoulder so I could tell how much I meant to you, meant it sincere back then. But let's take a moment to really sit with what image Frank is painting. Him and his lover in the hallway of a hotel with his arm around Frank's shoulder as Frank learns or feels just how much he means to this person through that nonverbal expression. There's so much that comes with the unsaid. And it's such a precious, small, beautiful little memory. And once again, the enclosed space comes up through the halls. It feels like it's protecting this memory. And I think that's why when he sings these lyrics, he's way more louder than he has been for the entire song so far. It's so much more emphatic. It's like when you are holding sand in your palms and you're squeezing tight so that it doesn't escape your hands. But the tighter that you squeeze, the more the sand flows out of your palms. And if you loosen your grip a bit, it actually stays. And I think he's so loud right now, and if he can say it the loudest he can, shout it into the void, then he can somehow make these memories more real and hold on to them. That's the feeling I get. To me, it feels like these holes act as a container for this moment, as a preserver, a protector. Also, to go a bit broader, the mind as a similar container for these tender memories where it preserves the past but also gets distorted within the walls of our mind. And yeah, there's a real sense of ephemerality, like this moment is fleeting because holes are places where movement occurs. But it's like he's frozen this moment in time and also preserved it with this song. So it's kind of meta in that sense. Once again, like, just to say it again, I really think it's so beautiful how much value he places on these small moments, just arm around my shoulder, that small gesture of physical affection, and how it's stayed in his memory. It's so moving. Okay, and then to the next line he sings, we had time to kill back then. This is real feeling that time is slipping, that time was their own back then. And then he says, you ain't a kid no more, we'll never be those kids again. Way louder this time as well. And the hurt is really starting to come through. That reckoning with the fact that the past is in the past. And then when Frank sings, it's not the same, Ivory's illegal. Okay, there's so much here. First, if we're to interpret Ivory as the drug, then the title Ivy would be an abbreviation of Ivory. And it makes the title feel way more personal. It sounds like something just him and his friends called Ivory. And the banning of Ivory, it's interesting because he doesn't say it's not the same, like the times have changed or whatever. He says Ivory's illegal. It feels kind of random and specific, but it just shows the things that we hold on to, what we remember, and the little things that piece together to make up a memory or a narrative. And the banning of Ivory becomes this tangible reminder that the times have changed. It's interesting because on the surface it seems like Frank is selectively choosing to remember some parts, like a memory bias, but maybe it's more of a subconscious process. Another quote from Ocean Vuong, just because he has so many incredible quotes about memory. He says, Ma, you once told me that memory is a choice, but if you were God, you know it's a flood. The way I interpret it is that memories are like a flood in the sense that they're all-consuming, overwhelming, and though they don't seem dangerous because of how delicate, intangible, and rosy they are, if you stay in this flood, you'll drown inevitably. Maybe this process of memory formation and reinterpretation is a more subconscious process that we don't necessarily have control over. We don't always choose what we value, what we remember, what matters to us. And that's why sometimes these specific or seemingly small or fleeting or like moments that you almost miss, that's what we remember. It's so beautiful, but also It means that the version of the past that you remember might be idealized or might not always be what really happened. And then the second interpretation of the title Ivy is that it's the plant, like the ivy plant. And it's such a great metaphor for the way that memory works, because ivy is this invasive weed-like plant, and it grows and it latches onto buildings and it becomes something entirely different as it grows. It's like how memories keep growing and changing based on our present perceptions of it, because perceptions are always changing. For example, he says, my waves never dipped back then to everything sucked back then. That's an example of that perception flipping. It's like before we can even realize, we've created a version of the past that consumes us and that is so different from what it might have been originally. Like the essence has changed. The past is deeply ingrained in like these roots of the ivy plant, but it also keeps growing. It's also just a very insidious process. You almost don't notice how much is invading until it's already taken root in every crack, every corner of your mind. I think that's what Vuong means by how memories flood us. The memory has been slightly altered so much that it's become something else entirely. And next, Frank sings, Don't You Remember? It's such a haunting question. It's rhetorical, like he screams it into the void, and he's holding onto something so fragile. And he asks this question because if the other person doesn't remember, then it means that he's almost completely alone in remembering these memories. If these memories are only real and exist to you, and you forget them, then they're gone. It's like they never existed. Because perceiving is a way that we keep the past alive. If no one remembers, it's almost like it never happened. And so this question feels so desperate and vulnerable. The next verse is particularly interesting because Frank comes back into the present. He sings, I broke your heart last week, you'll probably feel better by the weekend. It's very interesting because presuming that this is the same person that he's referring to, this lover or ex-lover, the fact that he's breaking this person's heart, there's sort of this power shift that he's the heartbreaker now. And he sings this in a way that feels a little detached and cold. Similarly with before, in the first verse where he was singing, you could hate me now, I could hate you now, kind of thing. It feels like this is routine for him and this person. And it also feels dismissive. Oh, you probably feel better by the weekend. The way that he's singing it in such a distant way feels like a coping mechanism to detach from his reality and how far removed it is from how rosy his version of the past is. And it's interesting because I feel like he could step back, but he's still choosing to be involved. He's contributing to this continuation of hurt. And it almost feels numbing somehow, maybe even masochistic. And it just makes me wonder, is it because this is all that's left and that's all that he can take? So it's what he's settling for? Is it to get a sense of power? Because why not fully commit to the past instead? Why torment yourself in this way? And then Frank sings, still remember had you going crazy, screaming my name, the feeling deep down is good. And the feeling deep down is good. We've heard that before, but now there's a sexual connotation. Before, the good feeling was something pure, like love or a lasting connection that persisted despite whatever had occurred, went down between them. But now this feeling is a sexual feeling. It signifies a loss of innocence, as this feeling has become purely physical and transactional. To jump to the next, I could hate you, he also shouts this line in a way that he hasn't before. The hurt is catching up to him, and he's no longer as calm or detached as he was before. The hurt is cutting through. And what I find interesting is that Frank says, I could hate you now, not I hate you now. And so I wonder what's stopping him from really hating this person. I wonder what he feels toward this person now, if it's not hate. And to go right to the outro, there's another shift in tone. It gets way more poignant and regretful and quiet. This outro is, for the most part, whispered, and it sounds like he's afraid to say it too loud because they're so vulnerable and things that he probably hasn't been thinking about for a while, things that have probably been nagging him in the back of his mind. He sings, all the things I didn't mean to say, I didn't mean to do. There were things you didn't need to say, did you mean to? And it's held back, it's tentative. There's so much lingering hurt that he's holding on to that's revealed in these lines. He clearly does care, no matter how detached his tone can feel sometimes. There are things that he regrets. There are still so many unanswered questions. Frank sings, repeatedly, I've been dreaming of you. Dreaming here both means desiring, like I've been desiring you, but also dreaming as in dreaming of the past, dreaming of not them, but a version of them that might no longer exist. And as the instrumental progresses in this section, it feels like he's sinking deeper and deeper into this dream version of his life. Talking about this whole song, it really reminds me of this word, which is antimatter with an E. And it's how in life we have these anti-version of things, you know, how anti-friends, anti-work, anti-school, they don't really exist in the real world, but they're versions that we created. And because we created them, they're real in our heads. That's what I love this song feels like for me. It's the anti-version of Frank's lover, of his past, of even the younger version of himself. And he keeps singing, I've been dreaming of you, until finally the last dreaming, he kind of shouts it. And there's so much pain warped up in that dreaming. And that moment feels so desperate. Almost like the beginning of an emotional breakdown. When you meta realize that the dream is just that, a dream. And that if you're dreaming about something, it means that it isn't totally real. It feels like a lot of suppressed feelings have caught up and are beginning to explode when that lost dreaming cracks open some of his deeper emotions and hurt. I think it's like deep down, we often know the truth that we are escaping from something. What we believe was so perfect might not actually be so perfect, that it's a mirage, even if we don't consciously know that yet. This also reminds me a lot of Noah Kahan's lyric in his song Stick Season, where he sings how every night he dreams of versions of you that I did not have, but I will not lose. And so these versions of his past, and these versions that live in Frank's head, he can't lose them if they don't actually exist anymore, and they exist in his mind, and so he holds on to them, because if he forgets or his perception changes, those versions are gone. It's interesting because it's not I've been thinking about you, it's I've been dreaming of you. It really emphasizes the actual act of dreaming. I don't really think he wants to wake up because his reality seems so much more sober in comparison, so much more gray and confronting. But I think that at the end we get the hint that he's starting to, or at least has to. Because what's left when you let go of the dream, right? You're left with the remains of what happened when that dreamy, almost hypnotic state breaks. This loop is an illusion because he's technically not actually bound by anyone, and yet he's trapped in the past. He's the one perpetuating this loop, and therefore only he has the power to break out of it. If only he's willing to acknowledge the truth of his reality and the untruth of his past. I really do believe that deep down, he knows that his world isn't as rosy as he made it out to be. That's why we see the present in this song. That's why he sings everything sucked back then at one point. He doesn't totally buy his idealized past, but he only believes it because it's the only way for shit to not hurt. So now going back to that technique I mentioned at the start of the song being pitched up by a half step, how Frank sounds younger using a sonic distortion, it makes a lot more sense now after going through everything. Because he's not actually his younger self singing this. It does sound like a missive from his younger self, but it's not. It's his present self that sounds younger using a sort of distortion. It's like he's trying to embody his younger self, but he can't. Literally, it's hollow, it's gone. What's left is just the remains. It's like he's trying to wear the clothes of his younger self. They're worn and tight, and the person that once fitted the clothes, they don't exist anymore. And you can put the clothes on and pretend, but you're not that person anymore. It feels like just putting on a costume, like a ghost of himself. With this technique, it's like he's trying to go back to that time, but he never can. He can only impersonate it. And just a few thoughts from me to reflect. I think it's interesting because the word dreaming is usually associated with the future. We dream of things and project into the future, but Frank's actually dreaming of the past. And it's not that these moments weren't real. It's just that these moments were strung together in a way that makes this narrative unreal, too idealized. The non-linear storytelling in this song is very much the way that the mind works, because the mind is this sort of time machine. We can dip into memories from whatever timeline and project into the future or revert into the past. Frank's looking to an altered version of his past as a sort of escapism. The past keeps playing in this loop as Frank holds on to it, because if he can keep going back to it in his head, it's almost like it never ended, or at least he can convince himself that it never ended. So memory becomes a vital act of preservation, but not necessarily preservation of what was accurate. But even though these altered memories and this version of the past departs from the truth more and more over time, in a sense, they're still real, because when you create something, in some sense you're making it real, right? To quote Ocean Vuong again, he says that to remember is to create, and therefore to remember is to be a poet. That encapsulates so much of this song so well, because what he's doing is creating. The memories that we create, rather than remember, become our version of reality. And so perception is a powerful thing, but it's also really dangerous. Maybe if Frank didn't idealize the past so much, it'd actually be easier to come to terms with. Because it's way more painful to think of this perfect, young, free time that you can never go back to anymore. It makes the distance between the past and the present way too hard to reconcile. This brings me to my next thought, how pain is shaped by the way we remember something, not just memory. Frank's pain seems to cut deep because of how good he thinks the times once were. His pain has these contours of longing and nostalgia. After Frank shouts the last dreaming, the song still continues, even though there's no vocal or instrumentals. You can hear for a good 20 seconds what sounds like the band packing up, and you hear objects moving around the room. The song literally comes back into reality, and after all this dreaming, Frank's just left with the present. It's like wherever you run, you always return to the present. In a meta way, this song actually consolidates and makes real that dreamy world. It grounds those memories into something that's tangible, like a song. This song is a memory in and of itself. It's a preservation, it's a mourning, it's a beacon from his younger self that's not really his younger self, but a distorted version. I think Frank is going to have to wake up, because ultimately the present is what we always return to. Okay, that brings me to the end of the episode. If you're still listening, thank you so much. I really hope I did this song some justice. But yeah, that's it from me.